Hello and welcome back. So, now that we have looked at the different pedestrian levels of service and how to develop them using flow models, let us introduce you to a new measure or a different other types of pedestrian level of service as determined by the Indo HCM. This is especially looking at the quality of the service versus the quantitative level of service. So, we will give you an understanding of how these two levels of service have been developed in the Indo HCM that has been published very recently in 2018. So, there have been various drawbacks or criticisms of purely quantitative pedestrian levels of service, right. Because the quantitative pedestrian levels of service are very similar or have been developed on the along the lines of vehicular level of service, researchers and experts started to question them, saying that though they may not be very applicable to a walking mode which is very different from a vehicular form of transportation. So, when two different modes are so different from each other, maybe there should be a different way of developing levels of service for pedestrians rather than developing it in a similar fashion to that of the vehicular level of service. So, then the first thing that came out of those kind of brainstorming sessions was that perception of safety, comfort, etc., have to be taken into account, because these it involves people who are walking on the streets, and as you walk there is an always a degree of comfort that allows you to gauge how well the physical systems are or the physical amenities are or the physical environment is. So, perception becomes a very important part. So, perception of safety and comfort started becoming very important in the development of pedestrian level of service. Hence came what is known as, the terminology was coined which is known as quality of service, right, rather than level of service, or qualitative pedestrian level of service started to be called as quality of service, and the measure of effectiveness is users perception. If people perceive that the facility is not good, that means they will not use it, right, even though it may be engineered in a very good way, or even though the flow or the speed and the densities are all indicating that this is good for pedestrians, but ultimately if they perceive that it is not a good facility, perceive in terms of safety and comfort, then the usage of that facility will be very little. So, we will see how all this can be calculated exactly. Usually what happens, how do we usually the way in which we capture the perception of people is on a Likert type scale. So, it is called a Likert type scale, where you ask people on such a scale. For example, a question may be asked that how much do you like the footpaths in your neighborhood, right. If this may be a question, and a hypothetical question that may be asked to you as a user, as a pedestrian, and you would be asked to give your rating or ranking of all these footpaths in your neighborhood. So, you would say how much do you like? I strongly agree. You may say that I strongly agree that all of the footpaths are good, or the question should be how much do you to what extent do you agree that the footpaths in your neighborhood are serving the purpose, right, are serving the purpose. So, if that is the question, then you would say you strongly agree that they are serving the purpose. That means, you perceive that it is very good, or you say that I strongly disagree, or anything in between, right. So, there can be variations in the scale. Usually what people do is they fix the middle point and the end points, and then play around with the intermediary points. You can have a 5-point scale just like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can have a 7-point scale. Sometimes people also have experimented with 10-point scales. Now, all of this have their own advantages. People are usually started with a 3-point scale, but they have moved away from it to capture users perception in a better manner, right. A 2-point scale is usually yes or no, whereas a 10-point scale would be there are a lot of intermediary points where people may strongly believe or not believe how well for example, the footpaths in your neighborhood are. So, this is how usually data is captured about the quality or the perception of comfort or safety or any other parameters from the users of the pedestrian facilities. They are then they could be easily then converted into qualitative into quantitative figures and for the ease of calculations later on. However, one has to be very careful that since these are Likert type data, they are ordinal in nature. So, it determines if one score is higher than the other, but the distance between the points. So, we is not known, right. So, we do not know if this and this is the same. We do not know if getting from your opinion, if your opinion has to be changed from 4 to 5 is the amount of work that needs to be done on the footpaths is the same versus if your opinion had to be changed from 3 to 4, right. So, in other words, when an official or when a public official receives such kind of ordinal data or receives such kind of perception data, the agency has to take a call, right. So, nobody wants to build any facility and the users not liking it, right. So, everybody wants that the users to like the facility. Now, if everybody says the users say that they are only rating the facilities sidewalk facilities as 3 on a scale of 5. So, what the officials would want to do is they want to calculate what they have to do in order to raise the perception of the people from 3 to 4. So, there is some, in order to do those activities, there is some money involved, right. There is some dollar figure involved or rupee figure involved. So, when you are collecting this kind of data, it is not easy to say that the same amount of money would be needed to move from a 3 to 4, which will be needed to move from a 4 to 5. So, we do not know the interval gap, but all we know is 4 is better than 3 and 5 is better than 4, that is all we know. So, that is why mean and average is not usually a good measure of central tendency. Using mode, just the count is always better. So, in the Indo HCM 2010 method, what they have a measure that has been calculated is called the walkability index. What the walkability index does is it determines, it asks such questions to every pedestrians and determines the importance of physical and user characteristics. It determines the importance and it also determines the satisfaction. There are two different questions that are asked. For example, you may be asked how important are sidewalks for you to walk, meaning if you do you even care there are sidewalks for you to walk, or you would just walk on the pavement. So, you would be asked to give an importance on say a 1 to 5 scale. So, you would say it is very important, meaning you will rate it 5. However, you will also be asked how satisfied are you with the current sidewalk network in your neighborhood. Then you would say, well, it is very important, but I am not at all satisfied. So, I am only giving a 2. So, on the importance you give a 5 out of 5, whereas on a satisfaction you only give a 2 out of 5. So, all you do is you do a weighted average of these two and you keep on asking this for all the users or a sample of the users in your neighborhood to get what you call a walkability index score. Now, this may be I just gave you an example of one question, but this could be done for different questions as well. Eventually, after you calculate, after you get all of those weighted averages, you can then use this table, which was empirically developed, and all the scales were empirically developed to determine what is the quality of service that your pedestrian level of your pedestrian facilities are providing. So, if your score is greater than 124, you are at a very good quality of service, whereas if it is less than 52, you are at a poor quality of service. The next thing to remember is to give actually or to define actually each of those physical and user characteristics. So, the physical characteristics have been defined using 5 different parameters. One is footpath surface, one is footpath width, one is obstructions, next is potential for vehicular conflict, and the other is continuity, right. So, if they are standardized and if they are defined, then you can ask the same question to everybody without getting, without worrying about the fact that the question, because of the variability in the way you are asking questions, people may answer it differently. So, there is always a problem when you are collecting perception data if you have not defined the questionnaire properly. If you are then people may give you different answers based on the way you ask the questions. So, you have to frame the questions, you have to define the questions very properly. So, when you say footpath surface, you have to say that a smooth surface without any cracks or bumps for comfortable walking is a very good surface, right. That is rated as the highest surface, and then you can have different layers of or different levels for footpath surface. Similarly, user characteristics are also defined using 5 different types of measures. One is encroachment, the other is availability of crossing facilities, security, comfort, the walk environment. So, these are all user centric or user characteristics, user behavior questions. So, you ask these 10 different questions, 5 pertaining to the physical environment where people are walking, 5 pertaining to what people feel about their trip, about their walking trip. You combine the findings of both of these questions, convert it into a walkability index score, and then get a quality of service measure, right. Again, this is these are importance score 5-point scales and satisfaction score 5-point scales, right. Remember, we will, for each question you will be asked 2 different subsets of questions. How important is it and how satisfied are you with the current situation? Based on this, you can then measure the quality of service. Like I just said, so footpath surface, once you have defined, let us go back. So, once you have defined footpath surface as a smooth surface without any crack for comfortable walking, so then that kind of qualitative definition has to be broken down into 5 different levels, right. So, the excellent level will be even surface with no cracks or bumps and tessile flooring, right, whereas poor would be no raised footpath at all. Satisfactory would be bad condition, lots of bumps and cracks, whereas good would be moderate quality with few bumps and cracks. So, these again remember, these are qualitative aspects, right. We are looking at quality of service. So, when you ask somebody about their perception, if you start asking numbers, then they may not be able to give you a good or a right answer that will help you understand the perception of the viewer. So, when you are asking to rate somebody how good the footpath surface is, you have to, yes, you have to divide them up into these 5 distinctly, but you also have to have a very reasonable or qualitative way of telling the or asking the person what you want to know. If you ask, for example, when you are asking a person how good a footpath surface is, and say that is it reasonable, is it of reasonable quality, walking is comfortable, they may be able to relate, yes, I do not have any difficulty in walking, so maybe I will rate it very good. Or if you say that, well, was not there any footpath at all, they said no, there is no footpath at all, then you would say if there is no footpath at all, there is no question of a footpath surface, so then you would rate it as poor, right. So, this is how you have to come up with scales for different parameters. Width, you can have a quantitative scale and you can actually measure it, you do not have to qualitatively ask anybody. Obstructions, again has to be qualitative scale. Potential for vehicular conflict, qualitative. Continuity, some kind of qualitative and quantitative mixed. So, once you know all of this, again these are user characteristics similarly defined for different scales, you can then go about and collect the data. So, let us give you an example of how we have used it in Indo-HCM. Say a footpath of width 2 meter in a residential area is to be redesigned and improved by giving importance to perception of pedestrians in terms of satisfaction and their importance on various qualitative footpath attributes, right. So, a footpath was already laid, but when it was laid, users perception was not taken into account. So, now they want to redesign it taking users perception into account. So, the following are the mean importance and satisfaction ratings from 200 respondents accordingly. So, what they found out was all these A1 to A10 are the questions that we have already looked at, we have already introduced you to, and the mean ratings have been found out to be these. These are I believe these are importance ratings and these are satisfaction ratings, right. So, once you know that, if you are asked to ask the if you are asked to calculate the walkability index and corresponding quality of service, all you do is, right, you multiply each of them, each of the sets, each of the pairs, add them up and you come to a walkability index of 98.71 or 99, 98.799, and you look up the table and you say that your quality of service that is being offered by the sidewalk currently is at a C quality of service, right. So, then you can do always a post analysis. Now, if an improvement is done and you do another survey after an improvement has taken place, you would expect that if everything has been taken into account, if all the users perception have been taken into account, this C would at least improve to B if not to A. So, that is how you can then quantitatively measure or qualitatively measure that users perspective has been taken into account while improving a pedestrian facility. Now, of course, there are lot of drawbacks on when you are looking at only qualitative stuff, right. Based on users perception captures users response comprehensively. Although people do agree that if you only look at quantitative aspects and do not take people's perspective, it will not comprehensively look at the scenario. However, the only source of analysis, if qualitative analysis is the only source, then they may be prone to inaccuracy, reasons being people are always not willing to or not answering the questions in a very proper manner. Maybe they are impatient, maybe they just want to get over with it. So, they always we have a tendency, if you are asked to rate anything from 1 to 5, we always try to stick to the center, right. We always try to tick 3 on a 1 to 5 scale most of the time. So, you are not able to get a proper answer, maybe the questions are confusing. If the questions are confusing, then you get different answers to different questions from different people. Then again, relating this qualitative measurement with quantitative measurements is difficult. So, if you do not quantify them properly into different levels, then it becomes a problem. Hence, it is suggested that both qualitative and quantitative PLOS should be used for pedestrian facilities. So, whenever you are actually judging the performance of a pedestrian facility, you do have a quantitative measure, you then also have a qualitative measure. Do not just go with the qualitative measure or do not just go with the quantitative measure, combine both of them and then take a call based on the existing conditions, right. So, again, if on a footpath, looking at a next example, on a footpath on an undivided bidirectional road with width 3 meter around a terminal area, based on a field survey, the flow rate is found to be 1100 pedestrians per 15 minutes. The footpath facility is bordered on the curb on both sides, bordered by curb on both sides, and the important satisfaction is given based on a questionnaire survey that was done. So, determine the PLOS and QoS of the existing footpath, right. So, QoS would be the qualitative one, whereas PLOS would be the quantitative one, and that would be based on the flow parameters, which we have already explained in the previous set of slides in the previous lecture, how to determine the quantitative level of service or PLOS, and we have already looked at QoS. So, let us see if you combine these two, what do you get, same answers, similar answers or not, all right. So, let us start. So, in determining the quantitative PLOS, you remember you had to follow 6 steps, which were already shown to you in the previous lecture. You identify the sidewalk based on land use. So, here your land use is a terminal land use. You get a measurement of the sidewalk width. You know already the sidewalk is 3 meter wide, terminal land use. You estimate the effective width of the facility. Remember, how do you determine the effective width? From the actual width, you subtract the different types of obstacles that are there, and each of these obstacles have a certain shy distance associated with it. So, here, since it says that it is bound by curb on both sides, so the shy distance is anywhere between 0.2 to 0.4, and if you just take an average of value 0.3 on both sides and you subtract it from the total width, you say that the effective width is 2.4 meter. Then you observe the pedestrian flow. You are already given that the pedestrian flow is 1100 for 15 minutes. So, per minute your pedestrian flow is that. You need to then estimate the peak flow rate. Peak flow rate is nothing but you observe, you divide it by 2.4 and you will get your peak flow rate, right, because 2.4 is the effective width. So, if you divide it by peak flow rate, remember, is pedestrian per meter per minute. So, this is for 2.4 meters. If you want it per meter, divided by that. So, this is your flow rate. Now, you know your flow rate, and remember, this chart that gives you the quantitative PLOS for each of the land uses. Now, you know that the land use is a terminal land use and your flow rate falls between this. So, as per the Indo HCM, your level of service is C. So, now you know that the quantitative level of service based on the flow rate and the effective width is level of service C. At the same time, you have already done a questionnaire survey and you have gotten the satisfaction and importance and satisfaction score to determine the QoS, quality of service. So, you have all of these individual scores. Again, you develop a walkability index WI and you get it as 32.42 or 33. Based on 33, you know the table and you see that it is less than 52. So, now you see that the quality of service provided by the footpath that you have is E. So, here you have two conflicting answers, right. When it comes to a quantitative pedestrian level of service, you are getting a C, whereas when you are getting a qualitative quality of service, it is coming out to be E. So, what this does is, if you had only developed this using engineering principles, then you would have thought that, well, C is the optimal level of service to have. So, this is the footpath is perfect. However, if you now, since you had already collected a qualitative survey and done a qualitative survey, you have said that you can now assess that this sort of a pedestrian footpath will be detested by users, right. So, now by doing that, you can understand that there is something has to be changed, something has to be improved in order for it to be liked by all users. Therefore, interventions that will help improve the quality of service has to be carried out, so that you get a balance between the quantitative level of service and the qualitative level of service. So, you see, through this example, I hope it is clear that if you only calculate the pedestrian level of service quantitatively, you may get a different picture, whereas if you only calculate the quality of service QoS or the walkability through the walkability index, you may get a different answer. So, it is always good to combine these two, because pedestrians' perceptions are very strong and have to be taken into account, rather than only looking at it from the point of view of engineering design. So, again, these are some of the references for you for further reading. So, in conclusion, I hope you have now understood how pedestrian level of service are different from vehicular level of service, and hence a qualitative aspect of it also has to be taken into account, rather than only the quantitative aspect, but at the same time qualitative levels of service have their own shortcomings. So, a balance has to be developed between a qualitative and a quantitative level of service, and we have given you examples of different measures of effectiveness that can be used to develop these qualitative and quantitative levels of service. Thank you very much.